that issue has not been dealt with because we have just a banging of heads, and the position gets very, very clouded, very clouded. So, and that's where we are right now in the Senate.
It's a really complex issue. I was actually a corrections officer. I turned 21 in the New York State Corrections Academy, and I worked in maximum security prisons for a couple of years. And the prisons are full. They're a dumping place for a lot of people with mental health issues, serious mental health issues, developmental delays. Prison is no place for children, really, not at all. So we have to find a better way of dealing with youthful offenders and rehabilitating.
The next questions, did you want to follow up?
No.
No. Next question is for Senator LaValle.
This is from the audience. What do you think about term limits for our legislators and committee heads?
We actually have, as part of our Senate rules, for leaders and committee chairs, term limitations. Generically, I have, in terms of limiting the term, and it's something that I want the audience to think about. So it's very popular right now to say, you know, an assembly member and a senator should only serve for X period, whatever you want to put, you know. However, once you do that, you then turn the power of government to non-elected people called the staff. The staff then runs the government. Now, one of the things that I didn't talk about is I started my career, I was a teacher, a school administrator. I ended up in Albany and I ran the Senate Education Committee. Then I got elected. And you know, I said to myself, why did I get elected? When I was a staff member, I had more power, more authority and say in how to shape educational decisions. So it's something that we have to be very, very careful because it looks very sexy, very appealing, but there's a downside.
With apologies to Senator LaValle, I would never think that a term over 20 years would do us any good. There's a lot of correlation to bad government and people being in office too long. It starts to represent a monarchy. So a short story about this is that one of the official parties in the state of New York now is the Reform Party. And the Reform Party just happens to be a unified party across the nation, chaired by the same person that was founding the New York Reform Party. So it has a plank for term limits in it. It also happens to be, just as an aside, the exit party from the GOP for the KKK, but you know, that's neither here nor there at the moment. So I talked to Mr. Bill Merrill, who's the chairperson for this Reform Party, and says, oh yeah, we love term limits. I said, well, you're endorsing Mr. LaValle. What are you gonna make the term limit, 60 years? So.
The next question goes to Mr. Fischer.
This is a press question. Affordable housing continues to be a critical issue threatening the economy of the East End and driving many young professionals from Long Island. What can the state do to help bolster local affordable housing efforts?
There's a lot of creative pieces to that. For one, the clerk's office is backed up for some really unknown reason. That needs to go faster. The title companies are complaining. We have lots and lots of zombie homes. That was brought up in conversation earlier. I would propose a new set of rules to start to make some of these zombie homes, abandoned properties, up for a lottery so that they could be gotten by anybody, get them back on the tax rolls, not just have towns arbitrarily knock them down. As well, I'd like to provide more special financing for people doing fixer-uppers. I work with SCORE, Service Corps retired executives. I put a lot of time into that. I'm semi-retired. And we're able to get, for businesses, we take people off unemployment and into business. And we have programs where we can get people $5 million in guaranteed loans. So certainly you don't need $5 million to fix up a zombie home. But some kinds of programs that will help people. There's a tremendous backlog in the courts of bankruptcies. I'd try and put in new standards for that, getting things through faster. Mr. LaValle sits on the Judiciary Committee also, by the way. But I think that's a problem. I also proposed a vacancy tax, that if a place is abandoned and seems to be abandoned, they put a notice on the door. The notice isn't removed. It looks like it's abandoned. Do this for commercial and for residential. That we have a progressive vacancy tax. That we start to add the cost of the blight to the property and close it down faster and make it available faster. Certainly, if people knew that allowing these homes to go vacant, allowing commercial properties to go vacant, would create an additional cost, they'd turn it faster. Now, I mean, one of the things that's happening, and Senator LaValle's supporting this, is private construction on SUNY properties. Now, we now have more commercial square footage available than ever before in Suffolk County. So why do we want to have government competing with the private sector? We have not had the proper outlook to put government as an aid to turning properties, commercial and residential property.
Okay, Senator, on affordable housing.
I don't think you should put words in my mouth about the private housing on SUNY campuses. I've been the sponsor of the law for first-time home buyers that allows certain real property tax breaks so that young people can utilize that. And Southampton was the first town to pass a resolution endorsing that. We have passed legislation that is law where the municipalities have to increase their percentage of affordable housing. So where a new development goes in or houses are being built, the percentage now it has been increased. And lastly, Senate delegation brought some $25 million or more to the housing partnership so that it could work with employers and give down payment breaks to young people. Years gone by, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle used to be the ones where you could ask them for help with the down payment. Today, we've actually created something to help individuals. So it is a very, very tough issue because we need to keep our young people there to be involved in the fire department, the ambulance service, and doing many other things. And we can't have them just leave the state.
The next question is for Senator LaValle.
This is from the audience. We have an excess of funds in the Land Preservation Fund. What do you propose to do with the excess? And I would rephrase it to ask whether you support the proposition on the ballot about using some of the community preservation funds to support water remediation.
Right. Thank you for that question, whoever asked it. I am the original sponsor with Mr. Thiel of the Community Preservation Fund, and I am the sponsor of what is on the ballot to allow the time period to be extended to 2050, to allow also 20% of the monies to be used for water quality issues. I hope that you start off on your ballot, I think it was shown, turn it over, flip it over, and cast your vote in the affirmative, hopefully, on this CPF proposition. I believe that we in Suffolk County, the 5 eastern towns, will lead the way on the kinds of things that we need to do to protect our groundwater and our surface water. Sewering is not an option in the East End. And there was a special provision put into this language to say this is not a proposal to support increased development, because people were very nervous about that. And Mr. Thiel and myself passed the original law and this, and that's why it's on the ballot. It needs your approval if we are going to do this. As the CPF itself, it has citizen participation. You put the exclamation mark on it.
I support the proposition, but with great reluctance on some of the things buried beneath. For example, Riverhead, for whatever good intentions, borrowed against their CPF. Some for preservation, some for overhead. Riverhead also took out of other funds. They took out of the water department fund, they took out of the ambulance, they took out of highway, and they used it for operating costs. So I think we need some really tight controls on this. The joke about Riverhead taking out of water and putting it into operating costs and then borrowing against CPF is then compress their budget. They go to dig a new well. They bought a piece of property for some reason other than water quality because they drilled into perk. And so now they have a really expensive problem there. So we really have to monitor these things very, very carefully. As well, any proposition with increased fees and increased cost to taxpayers at all, I'm really against. Extending debts, I'm against. Just another buried fee to create a lot of interest in an extension. So again, I'm in favor. You would have, everybody I think has gotten some of these flyers here, which say they're paid for by the Clean Water and Community Preservation Committee. Now, when you look, who is this? When you look at this, it's mostly funded by the Nature Conservancy. They gave $500,000 to get these flyers out to you. What's very interesting about this is the Nature Conservancy is who the studies are wrote the studies by which this is all based on. And there's some problems with those studies, quite frankly. They understate farm runoff problems. And when we look at this bill, 75% of home nitrogen comes out of your bathroom. So there are code changes that we could make that would knock that way down. We could have slightly modified plumbing to move the bathroom waste to a separate, lower impact, lower volume septic system. And in a lot of areas we can do leach fields, where you put the nitrogen to the surface, you don't inject it into the ground, and that solves the problem. They do that commonly upstate. So I think, if you don't have water, you don't have anything really, and we have to do something, but I don't think this was part of a well-thought-out plan. Thank you.
The next question is for Mr. Fisher.
This is a league question. What election reforms would you support, such as early voting, voting by mail, better ballot design, and voter registration modernization?
All the above. So we've had, since Bill Clinton, we've had the Electronic Signature Act. It should, you can do your banking and brokerage and some of your most sensitive transactions across the internet. Certainly you can do voting. Anything can be abused, but I think that it's very important to give people greater access to voting. Early voting, of course. I'd like to change the party rating provisions so that in some states you can register the day of the election. You can change your party up to the day of the election. I'm big on election reform. We have relatively low turnout. We have disenfranchisement of millennials. They're the next generation coming up to actually manage government, and they were active for Bernie Sanders. There's not a lot of evidence that they're going to be active in this November election. There might be a big stay-home factor. So we have to do everything we can, especially in New York, where we have some of this draconian policy, which keeps people away from their freedom that they would otherwise have if they were in another state.
Voter participation is an absolute. That's what our government is based on, we the people. And I have a feeling, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think you're going to see people coming out in this election in record numbers. We hear talking heads pontificate on whether the millennials are turned off or not turned off, or what they're going to do. I am not for early voting. Just think, you vote early, something happens after you voted, and you go, I got to go back and change my vote. No, you don't. You can't. So I think the most important things that we have to get our arms around is that campaigns today have gotten very, very expensive. We talk about the economy. I think political elections have probably jacked up our economy, the gross national product, quite a bit. But I do believe we have to get our arms around spending issue.
Okay, this will be the last question for both candidates, and then we can have each candidate ask the other a question. So one question, and it goes to Senator LaValle first.
Okay. What would be your top 3 priorities if you are reelected or elected?
I think one of my priorities is always tax relief, and that is going to continue. I've looked at my brochures over the years, and I chuckle because tax relief is very, very critical, as well as the area for the economy, jobs. And I think that a little thing like locating Stony Brook campus in Southampton, getting Stony Brook involved in the Southampton hospital issue. This is a thing that is critically important because it's going to create more jobs here in the East End. The heroin issue, like a laser beam, I'm going to continue to look at that. And I would say to you that the third issue is kind of attached to the second one, and that is mental health. We have mental health issues, and when I look at the number of suicides in young people, it is growing. So in order to address that issue, one of the things I'm going to make sure is we have more psychotherapists that deal with our young people. The environment is always on my list, and the